All right, thanks for watching. I don't do this very often. I do a little bit of woodworking, but I certainly don't do a lot of recording of it, so bear with the amateur hour. But what I want to do today is actually make a chessboard. Honestly, 20 years ago, this was my first woodworking project I did as I was getting into it, several years after high school shop class. But anyway, I made this chessboard with using my wife's grandfather's wood shop. Um, so my initials on here in March 1999. So over 20 years ago now. Anyway, it's held up very well. I'd like to make another one as a 20-year anniversary one. So that's what we're going to do today. I'm just going to rip up some strips. I'm going to do the same size, 1 3/4 on the squares, and have yourself a chessboard by the end of the day, I think. So hang in there and check it out. Okay, now we have some our strips, our first initial strips for the squares. We'll need 4 of each of those at about 17, 18 inches long. We'll get the cross-cut sled up here instead of the rip fence and get those to size, and then we'll be starting to shape up a board that quick. So, good deal. All right, I need 4 strips of maple and 4 strips of walnut for the board. And so I'm going to cut, they're 1 3/4 square, so times 8, about 14 inches. I'm going to give ourselves a little bit more for the kerf when we cross cut them. So I'm going to make this about 15 1/2. Just going to put it to the edge of my cross cut sled. It works out pretty well. I'll make up 4 of these and 4 of them walnut. And then we'll have something that's starting to shape up like a board, a cutting board initially or whatever. And then we'll glue it up and cross cut that. So stay with. So those are cut. Now you can start seeing um, shape up of the board, if you will. Looks like you can play around with that a little bit, move it around. But that'll be um, our initial glue up, which we can commence to begin. And now that we should be in the vicinity of the 14 1/4, 14 1/2 clamped. And then and this is the longer side, but as we glue this up, and then we got a cross cut here, so we'll lose and get back down to our 14 1/2 on that side also. So yeah, shouldn't take very long. Anyway, so we're going to be working in here. This is my glue up. Clamp these together, the strips together, and get some wax paper down so it doesn't stick all over the place. And we'll probably sandwich the edges to make sure they're nice and flat and level. We'll reduce some of the sanding afterwards. So let's see how this goes. All right, that's the initial glue up. We'll let that dry for at least a half hour, and we'll be back to process that a little bit. Maybe square it up, slice it up, get ready for our next glue up. All right, it's been about 45 minutes or so, so I'm going to break this down and see how we did. Doesn't look too bad. Take the scraper on the backside, get rid of some more glue, trim it up, and then just maybe sand it off a little bit, and then cut it the other way. Okay, that'll do for now. I just want to try to get most of the glue off and kind of get it leveled out. Tape measure didn't pick it up, but the maple is actually just a little bit thicker than the walnut. So I thought some of them were a little off on just one side, but it's actually the maple's high on both sides, so that took a little extra to kind of put them down a little flatter. I won't worry about trying to get them super flat right now because we're going to do this all over again, and there'll be still high spots. So now we're going to trim it up and make our slices the other way, so we're going to look like a chessboard real soon. All right, now we're going to square it up, and then I'll put it back on the fence actually and do our 1 3/4, go in the other direction. Well, as you see, I made my boards almost 1 inch, I think a little over 1 inch, 1 1/4 longer, and this is all we had left because 1/10 of an inch over 8 cuts adds up. So we had just over 1 inch of loss there. So anyway, keep that in mind when you cut your board up. Now we have our 8 pieces. And we have to turn this into a chessboard. Anyway, one more glue up, and then we'll be thinking about a border, what kind of border we can put on it. Okay, we're getting ready to do the last glue up. This is a little more crucial. We'll make sure obviously we have all our corners square, colors, get a nice clean match there, pluses on everything. And so anyway, we're going to skim this with glue, roll it down, and maybe use these to kind of make sure the edges are flat. So here we go. All right, there it is. Chessboard glued up, very flush edges here. So we have all our intersections pretty close, within tolerances, I would say, for an amateur. And then we'll let this dry and then give it a good sanding and then work on some borders. But it's really shaping up already, so cool. All right. This has had a good long time to dry up. So we're going to break this back down and see how we're doing overall. Give it another sanding and get ready for some borders. Okay. So I started out with a belt sander, but belt broke and all other kinds of things. So probably dangerous to use that anyway. Usually leaves grooves if you're not careful. So anyway, I burnt through some 80 grit, knock it off down level, and I think I'll hit it right now with some 150, kind of smooth out some of the cuts, and then should be good for a little bit. We'll get a border on this. Yeah, and then one, two, maybe three borders. Don't know what we're doing yet, and then we should have ourselves pretty much chessboard ready to be finished. So let's get a little sanding done. All right, there's the bottom. There's the top. Feeling really good. We'll just square these up just a smidge on these outer edges, um, and then we'll be ready for some borders. Okay, like I say, just finished up with 150 grit on the sanding. We just want to. This edge is nice and clean. This edge is clean. This is the last cuts, right? So we glued this way. So we have a little bit of glue edge on each of these, and maybe just a little hint of misaligned wood. So I'm just gonna take a sliver, just a hair off, just to kind of knock the glue off and kind of give it a nice square edge for our borders. So that's what we're gonna do here. We have ourselves a basic chessboard, right? Very usable already. So I'm gonna put some kind of edges. Haven't really figured it all out yet, but probably varying colors. And then I think I want to do I end up finishing it off with a mitered mitered corner, flat spot. So this might look something like this, with something like that. Maybe one or two pieces in there. We'll play around with it a little bit. So anyway, here we go. So we have a real thin, pretty much just a veneer edge. I'm going to put in there for separation. And then about 3 times as thick on the maple. Yep, just about 3 times as thick. And then we'll have probably like 2 inch, 2 1/4 inch border all the way around, and we'll make that mitered. I think that's what we're going to do. I think it'll look sharp. So let's go from there. All right, that should give us plenty to work with. This really thin strip, 60 inches long. We need basically 4/15s, so 63 inches. So we have plenty for that. Because this is so thin, it would get glued wobbly with clamps. So we probably should do at least these two together. I think so. So maybe front and back. We'll see how sloppy it gets. Okay. So we're going with a real thin walnut strip edge, veneer-like, and then maple, about 3 times as thick. We're going to do this side, and then we're going to do the same thing to this side. Like so. Press it all together. Let that set. Trim the edges, and do it again on the other side. All right, so while we're waiting for that to dry up, We got a couple edges, veneered edges started. I'm going to cut out the last border. It'll be about 2 inches wide. So we're just going to rip this, make sure we have some flat edges, and then we'll get some miters on it. But not doing the last part of it until I really know exactly what size I need. So yeah, let's get these ripped out. Okay, that's that. Two, they'll get mitered in here, mitered out here. And this will be our outside border. All right. So until we know how long everything needs to be, we'll wait on cutting these. But those should be pretty easy and quick. Just using cutout 45 against that crosscut sled. Love my crosscut sled. All right, these should be dry. I'm going to flip this around, do a 90 degrees, and do the other two sides. All right, so we're just going to square this up on all four corners. Yeah, so we can have another straight flat edge to work from for the other side. All right, we're going to do the other side. All right, the other side's glued up. We have some last border ready to be trimmed to size, and that'll be that. Gonna figure out what we're gonna do in the corners for the overlaps, but got a couple ideas. So anyway, wait for that to dry up. We'll add these, and then we'll have another creative moment. So cool. Okay. Do the other side, the other glue up for the veneer and the edging. Break that down, square up the corners, and then we'll know what length we can cut these to do the final border. Okay, I got to make a decision whether I'm going to have little squares in the corners or triangles. Cheap and easy. I can just put a 45 on this on all the corners, and then when the two borders come in, they'll leave a triangle, and I can just fill it with epoxy. What I think would look a little better is if they were just squares. So I think first attempt, I'm going to try to pull off cutting out a corner on each of them on the bandsaw. Probably could do it on the router, just do a little nick out of that, but corner first. If that doesn't work, I can go to the triangle, or a square first. I'll go to a triangle. All right, here goes nothing. Okay, I think that's going to work. I think that's going to work fine. I'm just going to set up a fence so I can try to keep it square. Okay. All right. We should have 4 very flat edges. Looks beautiful. Okay. After obviously a little bit of trimming for each of the miters, I think we have all 4 sides. I have some corner clamps I'm going to use, I think. Be best for this. Um, maybe some pressure on each side too, a little bit. But anyway, I think that's all it'll take to hold this together. So we'll go back over to the glue station and do that. Okay, another hour. All dried up. We'll take this off, and I'm going to hit it with some sandpaper. Probably right back to the 150 at first. Got some high spots. Yeah, and then clean up the holes and do some epoxy, and then that should do it. Sand that off, and we'll have ourselves a pretty nice chessboard. Pretty happy with it so far. Well, the camera's still running. Here we are, I guess 45 minutes later. Sanded both sides. Got one more high spot. Still need to get. But anyway, I'll let you decide, but I think it's looking great. Raise the grain a little bit. Show you the true color. That is going to be a beautiful board. These are the corners that we need to fill. Won't take much at all. But otherwise, real happy with how it's looking so far. All right, finished up last night doing a bunch of sanding. So new day, new shirt. And all we really have left to do is fill these corners. I left these corners open. I didn't want a bunch of mitered layers. I just want to do something a little bit different, so I'm going to fill them with epoxy. So we'll do that next, and then do another little sanding. Probably going to do some tapers on the edges, and maybe little grips underneath or something to pick it up off, because it's not easy to pick it up off the table right now. Still, I might end up having some legs on it or some sort of little pegs. But that's what we're going to do next, just do a couple quick fills with epoxy and try to color the epoxy and fill them up. So that's what we'll do. All right, I think that'll do it. Let that set up. It's 5-minute epoxy, but obviously we're going to let that set for a good long time. I'll let it cure. Hopefully in an hour we'll be able to work it, just try to level it off. All right. So obviously some concerns with using the epoxy on the top. I kind of messed that up. Anyway, because I'm worried about the staining, if you will, of the colored epoxy, but also the penetration of the wood, and then the oil not taken afterwards. What I discovered the hard way is I put tape on the backside so it wouldn't leak out, or the holes go all the way through. But I realized that this should have been the front side that I was taping and then poured upside down, because this is beautiful, clean epoxy fill. So anyway, we can take these off, but lesson learned. Maybe a hard one to learn. We'll see what the top end up looking like. But now I'm just going to take a paint scraper or a card scraper and scrape, while this is still a little soft, and scrape the top off and see how it fit, if it's recessed still any. It looks a little recessed, but all right, so maybe just one has a little recess in it. We'll see if any light sanding on the wood takes care of it. But that's where that is. So we'll go sand next and see how far that gets us. All right. Yeah, they definitely all leveled out, so that's good. Without too much extra effort. I mean, definitely going to give myself an A on this one for my caliber. Um, there's a couple things that I wish I could have avoided, but for the most part, there's really not a whole lot that I want to scrutinize against it. It's pretty solid. Like I say, just a little tiny gap here or there. I'm going to try to fill, probably with epoxy, but now I'm kind of leery about that. But and then it'll be ready for finish. I do want to do some tapered edges on it, just to kind of help with the sharp edges that seem to be this walnut's a little soft. It kind of seems to want to just kind of come off anyway. So I think it would ding pretty easy. So I'll put it like a chamfer on it. But yeah, chamfer the sides, put little handles on it. It's gonna be a great board. Okay, so kind of another little scary moment, but anyway, I want to chamfer the edge, all four edges, the top side. Just kind of give it a little round over, nothing too big, but just enough so to kind of take the sharp edge off of this, handling wise and otherwise. Maybe give it a little bit of depth or look to it. Side's really not wide enough for storing pieces anyway, so which is typical of some wider edges. So anyway, flip this upside down. So this is the bottom side, and just going to run this 4 times around the edges on this 45 chamfer bit on the router, and hope for the best. No chip outs and that kind of stuff. Probably try to chase it with something so it doesn't blow out the corners. Yeah, it definitely adds a nice little edge to it. I think it's the right call. So I have a pretty much finished product, with the exception of the finish, but I've completed the product for the most part. And like always, I always want to take it one step further. And so what I'm going to do, and probably regret it, is put little round off, almost it's a half-inch cove bit. It's like a bowl bit, nice rounded. I want like just 3 or 4 inches on each side for handles, to get your fingers underneath the board. And I'm sure to screw it up. So this could be the end of the board, or we'll have to get creative after that. But anyway, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to add a couple handles. I've set up some stops. So start on one side, end on the other, and it should be just this little buzz, and hopefully have a nice clean handle. But it usually doesn't work that way with me. So as expected or promised, they look pretty good with for their purpose, to add a nice little handle, finger hold, to just pick up the board. But this walnut is sensitive to chipping, so it did blow out on both sides, and that's going to have to be okay. Obviously, I'll probably just end up rounding both of them out a little bit, maybe do some fill on that. It is the bottom side. I got some other places I want to fill, so I might just end up just filling it. But anyway, so that is pretty much the completed board. Chamfered edges, filled corners and handle points. Not sure you can see that in that video, but I'll do a close-up at the end. But that's the board. A little more light sanding and you're ready for finish. There, that's how you build a chessboard in a weekend. All right. New shirt, new day. Just finishing up now with the sanding. Probably do one more round of 220, maybe even a little touch up with 320. We did, if you remember, let me see, it's been a day for me, 4 minutes for you. Put the grooves in the handles, in the bottom for the handles, so we can lift it off the ground real easy. We did have some chip out, so I added some epoxy on those corners. Not terrible, but not awesome either, but it is what it is. So anyway, I'm going to sand this up one last time. Already feels really good. And that's, I think I left off at 150, so it's already feeling pretty good. So we'll hit it with 220, and then we're going to, I think I'm going to use some tung oil. That's what I used on the old one 20 years ago. And I think I'm going to do the same. And hopefully the epoxy we added isn't going to inhibit any soak in. So, all right, a little more sanding, and then we're going to put some tung oil on. All right, what we have is the Watco tung oil finish. I don't know if this is really real tung oil or not. At $23, probably not, but maybe. And so anyway, that's what we're going to use. One coat, let it sit for 15 minutes, make sure it's all soaked in. And then we'll let it set for 24 hours and do it again. But anyway, this is the fun part, where it really brings out the grain. I don't know, that looks really good. All right, that's it. One solid coat, let it soak in. Let it soak in for 15 minutes and give it 24 hours to set and soak it all up, and then we'll go for another coat. Same thing. And then maybe third or fourth coat, start buffing it with some really triple, quadruple aught steel wool. But so far, still so good. Got a cut on my finger and double bagged it, but hopefully don't want to get that on there. All right, till tomorrow. All right, that was like 8 coats that we added. I had to sand down in between a couple of them. I had some high spots where the grain raised up, so probably wouldn't obviously need 8 total, but kind of back and forth. Kind of lost some ground, put it back. But 8 coats. And this last one, I've been gone for about a week, business trip, whatever, and so it kind of let it set and dry real well. Took some steel wool and just kind of buffed it down with steel wool. Had a couple high spots. Again, this is just a wipe-on finish, tongue oil varnish finish blend. So had a little spots on it that was kind of just still residual from the wipe-on. So just kind of buffed that out with the steel wool, and then buffed it off with a nice soft cloth. And I think I'm going to call it. I think that's it. I was going to put a varnish spray over the top, but I don't think it's necessary right now. I can always do that later. But yeah, that's the 20th anniversary chessboard. We'll show you a close-up of it at the end. So thanks for watching the build.